Mrs. Penelope Wexley made her entrance with the kind of theatrical flair that could only be described as a cross between a peacock's grand display and a Broadway diver's final bow. The swish of her emerald gown, studded with sequins that caught every flicker of light in the vast ballroom, announced her presence long before her sharp, jewel-encrusted glasses came into view. Ellie, standing somewhat awkwardly near the marble columns, felt the sudden weight of all eyes pivot toward her as Penelope's gaze locked onto her like a spotlight seeking its star. "My dear girl," Penelope began, her voice a rich contralto that carried effortlessly over the hum of the gala's chatter, "I must say, your performance tonight has been nothing short of spectacular. Who would have thought that beneath those paint-splattered sleeves lurked the cunning and courage to outwit a man like Maximilian?" Ellie blinked, caught off guard by the flamboyant woman's directness. The words, though delivered with a mischievous twinkle in Penelope's eye, felt surprisingly sincere. The crowd around them seemed to lean in, their initial suspicion about Ellie's odd presence dissolving into curiosity and, in some cases, admiration. I just did what I had to," Ellie stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced down at her hands, the remnants of her art supplies now a badge of honor rather than a mark of her outsider status. "Nonsense," Penelope exclaimed, waving a manicured hand as if brushing away Ellie's modesty. "You've turned the entire evening on its head. The socialites, the billionaires, even the security utterly confounded. And for what? To save the honor of this glittering disaster we call a gala. Bravo!" Jasper Quinn, standing quietly nearby with his usual stern expression somewhat softened, gave a subtle nod of approval. His eyes, usually scanning the room for threats, now rested on Ellie with a newfound respect. The tension that had hung between them since their first skeptical encounter seemed to ease, replaced by a quiet camaraderie. Penelope turned her attention to the assembled guests, her voice rising with theatrical gusto. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us raise our glasses not just to the glitz and glamour of this evening, but to the unlikely heroine among us, Miss Ellie Harper, whose wit and tenacity have reminded us all that sometimes the greatest power lies not in wealth, but in the courage to be oneself." A ripple of applause swept through the crowd, mingling with the soft clinking of crystal glasses. Ellie's cheeks flushed, a mix of embarrassment and pride warming her from within. For a moment, the absurdity of the night, the mistaken identities, the slapstick chases, the social satire seemed to crystallize into something meaningful. "I never imagined I'd be the toast of a billionaire's gala," Ellie mused quietly to Jasper as the crowd's attention shifted elsewhere. "And yet, here I am." "Seems you've earned it," Jasper replied with a rare smile. "Don't let it go to your head." "No promises," Ellie quipped, her grin returning. "After all, what's life without a little chaos?" As the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The guests, once rigid and guarded, now moved with a lighter step, their laughter more genuine. The social hierarchies, for all their pomp and circumstance, had been playfully upended, if only for an evening. Penelope, ever the socialite with a penchant for drama, took Ellie under her wing, promising to introduce her to the finer points of navigating high society's minefield. Ellie, though still wary, found herself intrigued by the possibilities. In that moment, beneath the chandeliers dripping with crystals and the soft glow of candlelight, Ellie Harper stood not as a nervous art student lost in a world of wealth, but as a woman who had, through a series of fortunate missteps and a healthy dose of slapstick luck, carved out her own place. The gala's chaos had birthed a new kind of order, one where courage, humor, and authenticity could shine brighter than any diamond. And as the night hummed on, Ellie couldn't help but wonder what mischief awaited her next. After all, if a night like this could happen by accident, what could she conjure on purpose? With a final glance at the glittering crowd, Ellie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The socialites' thanks were more than just words, they were a key, unlocking doors to a world she'd only ever watched from the outside. and now she was ready to step through. The gala, once a stage for the absurd theater of wealth and power, had transformed into a canvas. And Ellie, with all her quirks and paint-stained hands, was ready to paint her next masterpiece. But first, perhaps a much-needed cup of tea, and maybe a moment to catch her breath before the next act began. I remember the moment I finally sank onto the grand staircase, the one that looked like it belonged in a palace rather than a billionaire's mansion hosting a gala that had spun wildly out of my control. The chandeliers above dripped with crystals that caught the light in a way that made the whole room sparkle like 1,000 tiny stars caught in some elaborate net. My paint-splattered clothes, once a source of shame, now seemed to shimmer softly in the warm glow, a badge of honor earned through utter chaos. It was strange to think back on how I had arrived that evening, a broke art student desperate for distraction and inspiration, only to be mistaken for security and thrust into a world so far removed from my own. The nervousness that had clawed at my insides from the moment I stepped through the doors was replaced, slowly and awkwardly, by something else, a quiet pride, a sense of accomplishment that refused to be dismissed. Mrs. Penelope Wexley was nearby, as usual, the very picture of flamboyance in her extravagant gown that sparkled almost as much as the chandeliers. Her voice was a rising and falling melody of scandalous tidbits and sharp observations, her sharp tongue slicing through the social fabric with practiced ease. I caught snippets of her recounting the night's absurdities to a small circle of eager listeners, her animated gestures punctuating the gossip that somehow felt more like an act of rebellion against the very society she so desperately wanted to belong to. I couldn't help but smile, amused by the irony. You simply must hear about the gentleman who tried to sneak past the buffet line twice, she declared, eyes twinkling with mischief. I chuckled softly, the sound surprising even me. It was these moments, the strange camaraderie born from shared absurdity, that made the night less like a nightmare and more like a story worth telling. Jasper Quinn, the head of security and my unlikely ally, leaned casually against the polished banister not far away. His usual stern expression softened as he caught my eye, and for a brief second, he offered a genuine smile, one that said more than words ever could. It was an acknowledgement of the strange journey we had endured together, a tentative trust forged in the fires of mistaken identities, slapstick chases, and social satire. Not bad for a paint-splattered art student, he murmured, his tone dry but warm. Not bad at all, I replied, my voice steady despite the whirlwind that had brought us here. The gala was winding down now. Guests drifted away, their laughter and chatter fading into the distance, leaving the grand ballroom feeling suddenly cavernous and quiet. The echo of footsteps bounced softly off the marble floors as I made my way toward the exit, the cool night air calling me outside. The city lights beyond the mansion's gates shimmered like promises waiting to be fulfilled. As I stepped into the night, I realized that I was no longer the nervous outsider who had stumbled through the doors mere hours before. I was someone who had faced chaos head-on, who had navigated the absurdities of wealth and power with wit and courage, and who had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. The world was still a confusing, often ridiculous place, filled with social games and mistaken identities, but I was ready to embrace the unpredictability, to find inspiration not just in paint and canvas, but in the very messiness of life itself. And as the cool breeze brushed against my face, I couldn't help but smile. Because if there was one thing I had learned tonight, it was this: sometimes the best stories are the ones you never meant to live, but can't wait to tell. With that thought, I stepped forward, ready for whatever mischief and adventure awaited me next. The ballroom was a cavernous echo chamber now, the laughter and chatter reduced to a faint murmur that fluttered through the grand chandelier like dying embers of a once roaring fire. Ellie Harper stood by the sweeping staircase, her paint-splattered clothes catching the last glints of crystal light, each blotch telling a story not just of artistic mishaps, but of survival and unexpected heroism. The very stains she had once dreaded now seemed to shimmer with a sort of chaotic pride, a tapestry of the night's misadventures woven into the fabric of her identity. Gathering her modest belongings from a nearby velvet chaise, her paintbrushes crammed into a battered bag, her sketchbook a little worse for wear but filled with frantic, inspired doodles, Ellie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night settle around her like a strange, comforting cloak. The grandeur of the billionaire's mansion, with its gilded walls and ornate fixtures, felt less like a cage now and more like a stage on which she had performed a most unlikely act. A sudden flutter of silk and jingling jewelry announced the arrival of Mrs. Penelope Wexley, who swept in with the dramatic flair of a seasoned socialite. Her extravagant gown caught the chandelier light in a dazzling display that threatened to outshine the crystals themselves. Yet, it was the look in her sharp eyes, a mix of mischief and genuine warmth, that caught Ellie's attention. "Darling," Penelope purred, producing a small, sparkling handkerchief embroidered with a delicate silver thread. "For you, to wipe away the tears of a night well survived or the paint stains of a battle hard won." Ellie accepted the gift with a grateful, if bemused, smile. The gesture was a bridge across the social chasm that had seemed so insurmountable hours before. Here was a woman who, beneath the layers of drama and gossip, recognized the absurd courage it took to navigate this world. "You handled yourself remarkably," Penelope added, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Not many could have stolen a thief's prize and lived to tell the tale." Before Ellie could respond, a firm but friendly hand rested on her shoulder. Jasper Quinn, the head of security, stood stoic as ever, his usual stern expression softened by a rare smile. "You did good, Harper," he said quietly. "More than good, actually." Ellie looked up, surprised to see genuine respect in his eyes. The man who had been her most persistent skeptic had become her unlikely ally. Their fragile partnership had weathered suspicion, slapstick chaos, and social farce, emerging stronger for it. "Thanks, Jasper," Ellie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Couldn't have done it without a little luck and a lot of clumsiness." He chuckled, a sound surprisingly warm. "Luck's part skill, part chaos. You've got both." The mansion was nearly empty now, the raucous energy of the evening dissipating like a dream upon waking. Ellie took one last look around the vast ballroom, the ornate walls and sparkling chandeliers bearing silent witness to the night's madcap escapades. The gilded cages of high society had revealed themselves as nothing more than elaborate costumes, and Ellie had learned to dance through the masquerade with awkward grace. As she stepped toward the grand double doors, the cool night air greeted her like a balm. The city lights twinkled distantly, promising a world far larger and infinitely more unpredictable than the mansion's gilded walls. Ellie's heart pounded not with fear or insecurity, but with the thrill of new beginnings. Her paint-splattered clothes, once a source of embarrassment, now felt like a badge of honor, a mark of a knight that had tested every ounce of her wit, courage, and resilience. She was no longer just a broke art student lost in a world of wealth and pretense. She was a storyteller, a survivor, and an unlikely thief whose canvas was life itself. With a final glance back, Ellie stepped into the cool embrace of the evening, the mansion behind her fading into the shadows. Ahead lay untold adventures, mischief waiting to be made, and a story only she could tell. And for once, she was ready. The night had changed her. And she was ready to change the world, one chaotic, hilarious, paint-streaked step at a time. The night had finally given way to dawn, and with the first tentative blush of morning light, Ellie Harper found herself standing at the threshold of the billionaire's mansion, the grand doors closing softly behind her like a book's final page. The air was crisp, the kind of sharpness that seemed to cleanse the remnants of chaos clinging to her paint-splattered clothes. She inhaled deeply, savoring the cool breeze that carried away the scent of expensive perfume and spilled champagne, leaving only the fresh promise of a new day. For a moment, Ellie simply stood there, letting the silence of the early hour wash over her. The mansion loomed behind her, a glittering fortress of absurd social rituals and extravagant excess, now quiet and empty except for the echoes of laughter, accusations, and slapstick misadventures that had filled its halls barely hours before. She could almost hear the ghostly footsteps of Maximilian's bumbling accomplices tripping over themselves in a futile attempt to evade capture, or Mrs. Wexley's sharp-tongued quips fluttering through the air like mischievous sparrows. Her fingers traced the edge of her jacket, still flecked with dried paint and the faint smudge of panic. Just a few hours earlier, she had been an outsider, a broke art student with nothing but nervous eyes and a desperate hope for distraction. Now she was something else entirely, a survivor of the night's absurd theater, an accidental hero who had stolen not just a priceless pocket watch but also a moment of clarity and courage. Behind her, the mansion's grand driveway stretched out, lined with ornate lampposts that flickered as if reluctant to greet the dawn. Ellie's footsteps crunched softly on the gravel as she moved forward, each step shedding layers of insecurity and self-doubt. The world outside the gala awaited, unpredictable and daunting, but somehow more inviting than before. Inside, the ballroom was beginning to settle into stillness. Jasper Quinn, the ever-watchful head of security, whose stern facade had cracked just enough to reveal a reluctant respect, stood near the entrance. His hands were steady as he adjusted his badge, a small but significant gesture of acceptance. His eyes met Ellie's fleetingly, and for a moment. No words were needed, only the tacit acknowledgement of shared trials and tentative friendship forged in the fires of chaotic misadventure. Mrs. Penelope Wexley lingered nearby, a vision of flamboyance draped in extravagant gowns and glittering jewelry. Yet tonight, her usual sharp edges were softened by the night's revelations. Sipping her tea with a small, knowing smile, she embodied the paradox of the gala itself, a world obsessed with appearances yet incapable of hiding the truths beneath. Her twinkling eyes betrayed a mixture of amusement and genuine admiration. The socialite's love for scandal tempered by respect for the unlikely young woman who had appended the evening's carefully managed order. And then there was Mr. Archibald Sterling, the billionaire host, standing by the grand staircase as oblivious as ever to the upheaval his mansion had witnessed. He adjusted his cufflinks with an air of dignified composure, the weight of his obsession with appearances settling heavily in the quiet space. To him, the night was just another event, a spectacle to be curated and controlled. Yet, in the lingering silence, even his grandiosity seemed to falter against the messy reality of human folly and courage. Ellie paused at the edge of the driveway, glancing back once more at the mansion's glowing windows. Her heart swelled with a curious blend of amusement and bewilderment at the social theater she had just survived. The absurdity of wealth and power, the fluidity of identity, and the thin line between heroism and folly all danced through her mind like a surreal, slapstick play. A soft smile tugged at her lips as she turned away, ready to face the unpredictable canvas of her future. Life was sure to throw more mischief her way, and this time, she felt prepared to meet it head-on. With every step into the dawn, Ellie Harper embraced the chaos and comedy that defined her story, knowing that her next adventure was just beginning. As the sun began to rise, casting warm golden hues over the quiet estate, Ellie's silhouette receded down the road, a paint-splattered emblem of resilience and wit. Somewhere behind her, the echoes of the gala's madness faded, but the lessons and laughter would linger, fuel for the art and life she was determined to create. And so, with a heart full of hope and a spirit sharpened by the night's wild escapades, Ellie Harper stepped into the new day, ready to turn her unlikely tale into the masterpiece of her own making. The first light of dawn crept gently through the window of my little apartment, casting long, delicate shadows across the chaos of paint tubes, brushes, and half-finished canvases scattered about like the aftermath of some artistic storm. I sat perched on the edge of my worn sofa, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee, as if it were a talisman against the dizzying swirl of thoughts that the night had left behind. The glittering, absurd, maddening gala replayed in my mind like a bizarre film, one I had never auditioned for but somehow starred in. I never imagined that a night meant for distraction and inspiration would become a comedy of errors that flipped my world upside down. Yet, there I was, paint-splattered and exhausted, feeling a strange warmth blossoming in my chest, a mixture of disbelief, amusement, and something surprisingly like pride. It was the pride of having survived the chaos, of having stumbled through a world that seemed designed to swallow people like me whole, and come out the other side not unscathed, certainly, but alive and kicking. As the sun painted the sky with hues of soft pink and gold, I found myself smiling at the ridiculousness of it all. From being mistaken for security to accidentally stealing a thief's prize, to navigating a social labyrinth of eccentric billionaires, nosy socialites, and bumbling henchmen, it had been an absurd dance of mistaken identities and slapstick mischief. Yet beneath the laughter and clumsiness, there was something more profound, a revelation about the fragile facades we all wear. The invisible lines drawn by class and circumstance, and the unexpected courage we find when those lines blur. My sketch pad lay open on the coffee table, a visual diary of the night's madness. Quick, whimsical caricatures of the guests, exaggerated and affectionate, each stroke a reminder that humor was my refuge and my weapon. There was Mrs. Penelope Wexley, draped in jewels that looked like they might start a small fire, eyes sharp as daggers yet twinkling with mischief. Jasper Quinn, the gruff head of security, caught mid-frown but with a hint of reluctant respect in his gaze. And Maximilian Crane, the suave villain whose charm barely masked the ruthless ambition beneath. I traced a finger over a sketch of myself, nervous eyes, clumsy stance, but somehow standing tall amidst the chaos. It was a self-portrait not just of how I looked, but of how I felt, vulnerable yet unbroken, awkward but undeniably alive. The phone buzzed beside me, a lifeline to the world outside my quiet reflections. It was Leela, my best friend and relentless source of comic relief. Her voice burst through the speaker, bright and warm, a stark contrast to the soft quiet of the morning.
Ellie!
Are you still alive? I swear, you sounded like you were narrating a slapstick novel when you called last night. I chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. Barely. I think I tripped over a dozen priceless antics and insulted half the guests. Classic you, she teased. But hey, you a legend now. The unlikely thief who saved the day. You've got a story that's way better than any of those boring art classes. Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. In the swirl of chaos, the clumsy mistakes, and the absurd social theater, I had found a new narrative for myself. Not just the broke arts student slipping through cracks, but someone who could laugh at the madness and maybe, just maybe, make a difference in her own unconventional way. We talked for a while longer, her lively chatter weaving through my thoughts and reminding me that no matter how strange or difficult the night had been, I wasn't alone. When the call ended, I felt lighter, buoyed by friendship and the quiet thrill of possibility. I stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the waking city bathed in morning light. The reflection staring back at me was still a little awkward, a little unsure, but with eyes that held something new, confidence born not from perfection, but from perseverance. The night's chaos had stripped away pretenses and left me with a raw, unvarnished truth about myself and the absurd world around me. Heroism and folly, identity and illusion, they danced together in a strange, beautiful ballet. And I was ready to keep stepping onto that unpredictable stage, paintbrush in hand, heart open to mischief, comedy, and whatever the next canvas might hold. As the sun climbed higher, I whispered to the quiet room, "Bring it on, world. I'm ready." And with that, the unlikely thief found her next great adventure not in stolen treasures or glittering mansions, but in the messy, wonderful art of living. Morning light crept softly over the horizon as I stepped out of the mansion, the night's chaos finally behind me. The cool dawn air felt like a gentle handshake from the universe, neither harsh nor forgiving, just a quiet acknowledgement that everything had changed. Whether I liked it or not, my paint-splattered clothes, once a mark of my clumsy outsider status, now felt like a badge of honor, proof that I had survived the social jungle and somehow thrived in the midst of it. Taking a deep breath, I let the tension drain from my shoulders. The gala was over, but its echo hummed in my veins like a mischievous tune I couldn't quite shake. I pulled out my phone and dialed Leela, my voice still a little hoarse from laughter and adrenaline. "You won't believe how it ended," I said, grinning despite the early hour. Her infectious chuckle was the perfect counterpoint to my tired excitement. We exchanged stories, her witty commentary grounding my wild recollections, making everything feel less like a madcap nightmare and more like the kind of story worth telling. Through the crackling connection, I felt the comforting tether of friendship, the reminder that no matter how chaotic life became, I wasn't alone. Later, as I wandered back toward the street, Mrs. Penelope Wexley appeared as if summoned by the morning light itself, her extravagant gown still shimmering faintly in the dawn. She gave me a theatrical bow, jewels catching the faint sun. "My dear, you are quite the sensation," she declared with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. Her flamboyant validation was unexpected, but welcome, a quirky stamp of approval from a woman who thrived on social theatrics. It was oddly reassuring to know that even the glitterati had their moments of sincere admiration. Back in my small apartment, the once intimidating blank page now beckoned invitingly. I opened my battered sketchbook, fingers itching to capture the night's absurdity, the slapstick chases, the whispered conspiracies, and the slow bloom of my own confidence. Each stroke of charcoal and splash of color was a rebellion against the insecurity that had haunted me for so long. The chaos I had stumbled through was not just a story to tell, it was the raw material for the art I longed to create. A vivid tapestry woven from mistaken identities, laughter, and the strange beauty of human folly. As I sketched, I thought about Maximilian Crane and that priceless pocket watch, symbols of a world I had only glimpsed, a world both ridiculous and intoxicating. But more than that, I thought about myself, no longer just the nervous art student trying to blend in, but someone who had stolen a moment of courage from the madness and made it her own. The gala had been a farce, a comedy of errors, but it had also been a turning point. And now, armed with nothing but paint, wit, and a healthy dose of slapstick mischief, I was ready for whatever absurd adventures awaited. The dawn was breaking fully now, washing the city in pale gold. I closed my sketchbook with a sigh that was part relief, part anticipation. The unlikely thief had found her next canvas, and this time, the masterpiece would be hers to paint.